I'm hitting the record button now. So information that we're sharing will be available for you later, as well as for colleagues or others with whom you'd like to share the webinar today. So welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Patricia Julianell. I am the Director of State Projects and Legal Affairs at NAEHCY. I have three wonderful co-presenters on the line today, and just to avoid too much chaos at the beginning of the webinar, I'll wait and introduce them a little bit later. But they are task force experts from around the country who will be sharing their successes and some of their challenges with you today. As you know, the topic of our webinar today is youth homelessness task forces, how to get them started and how to keep them going. We have some resources about this on our website, and we'll be referring to those as well as some other tools for you throughout the presentation today. A little bit more housekeeping. Due to the number of people on the call, we won't be accepting questions orally over the phone or over the computer. What you can do, however, at any time is use the chat box or question pane that should be available on the right side of your screen. You can type questions in at any time, and when we get towards the second half of the presentation, we will be stopping and taking questions. Those questions can be directed at me or at any of the other speakers that you'll be hearing from today. So just go ahead and type those in at any time. And you have to make sure, please, that you do submit them to the entire audience, so that we make sure everyone can see them. But you're welcome to ask those questions anytime, and we will hopefully get to all of your questions before the end of the session today. So to get started, a little bit of context and why NAEHCY is here talking to you about this topic. Of course, NAEHCY is the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, and unaccompanied youth task forces may not seem something that's specifically associated with education, but of course what we know is that youth experiencing homelessness have a lot of trouble being successful in their education when they don't have their basic needs met and basic safety and stability. So about 3 years ago, actually about 4 years ago now, we started a project that we called Unaccompanied Youth Task Force Project. Initially, it was going to be a 3-year pilot, and as I mentioned, we're now in our 4th year, so we have expanded. The model was to work with youth, service providers, and community members to develop some creative strategies to support unaccompanied youth. We recognize, as all of you know, that there's often not sufficient funding or awareness about youth homelessness in a community to really raise that issue up to a profile where it gets a lot of attention and a lot of support. So part of the work of the task forces was to raise that profile, raise that awareness, and also think about ways that we could help young people today, even recognizing that today we don't really have the resources that we need. But waiting for an unspecified amount of time to get the resources that we need is really not a viable solution to young people who are experiencing homelessness today. We know that service coordination is effective. Studies show that. And so our goal was to try to bring together multiple agencies to coordinate services for youth experiencing homelessness. Where and why did we start this project? Well, we wanted to look at a variety of communities, rural, suburban, and urban. We looked at data from school districts on their homelessness numbers. We looked at data from the National Runaway Switchboard. The switchboard actually collects data by the origination area code. So if you go on the National Runaway Switchboard website, you can download data and see how many calls come in from your area code. So we were able to look at that. We looked to a certain extent at political significance where we thought we might be able to make change on a state or even a national level. And of course, by request. Some of you on this call today may have submitted a proposal when we had our request for proposals open this past summer to have a task force brought to your community. And you can see on the slide the different communities where we're working. Some of those are places we've been active for a number of years, and others are places where we're just starting. So the overall goal is quite simple. We want to identify what young people need, and we want to try to identify some creative strategies to meet those needs through interagency cooperation. So bringing together to the table everyone who has a stake in this issue, even if they might not always recognize that they have a stake in it. So we do want to try to identify new partners to energize efforts, and we absolutely want to engage young people as leaders. So task force membership, you can see on the slides some of the different agencies and organizations and community members that we have been working with in different communities. Our task force leaders who are going to speak later will talk more specifically about who's been important in their community. And the leadership and active participation of young people really has been critical. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It can be a challenge to try to create a circumstance in which young people experiencing homelessness can be very active and can be leaders. They have so much going on in their lives that oftentimes being able to show up at a meeting or being able to follow through on commitments to help is something that's very challenging for them. And so our work on the adult side is how can we put appropriate supports in place to help them to be able to participate that way. And I know that some of our folks later will speak about that as well. But it really does require a deliberate focus. Everything from where are we meeting? Sometimes the adults want to meet in a place that has really convenient parking, but if we want young people to come, we need to meet at a place that's accessible by public transportation. And again, time of the meeting. A lot of times those of us who work in this work, we want to meet during the workday, whereas young people might be at school during the workday and they might need to meet later. So really thinking about from the very most basic logistics all the way through things like having food available and making sure that youth involvement really does mean that we're actually not only listening to youth, but acting based on what we hear from them and changing our own behavior and our own priorities based on what we're hearing from the youth. So this is something that we do need to work on and we're trying to work on, and we'll get into some of the details of that later. So in terms of the way our task forces have worked, we try to keep things kind of simple and kind of action oriented as much as possible. So we do have needs assessment surveys. We have a survey for community members, service providers, other adults, and then we have a survey that's really specifically designed for young people who either are or have experienced homelessness. We get those surveys out. Obviously, as a national organization, I'm not really in a position to get surveys to individual young people in a particular community. So we work through service providers, through community agencies, through youth organizations, through school districts. In one community east of Phoenix, we actually had a terrific law enforcement officer who had great relationships with unaccompanied youth and went out and got a bunch of surveys for us from young people experiencing homelessness there. So we really need to get the surveys to people that young people trust and that young people have access to so that we can make sure we're getting those filled out by youth. And the needs assessments really give us guidance. Obviously, they tell us what we need to do based on what the youth are telling us they need, but they also give us legitimacy because, again, it's not one particular agency or one particular kind of agenda, so to speak, that's defining what we're going to do. It's really the young people themselves defining what we're going to do. And that I found that that really helps unite the community behind certain goals. In terms of what we found from our needs assessments, and again, some of our later speakers may want to address this in terms of their communities, and it does vary to a certain extent from community to community. But one thing that I've found that has been a little bit surprising is from large cities to the most rural areas and everything in between. We've actually found the needs to be pretty consistent. In every community, young people are identifying food as usually the top, if not the second of greatest need that they are facing. Transportation, repeatedly, and again, this is true of cities that have decent public transportation all the way through areas that have very little, if any, public transportation. Regardless of what's there, young people are saying it's not working for them, it's not enough. They can't get where they need to get to, whether that's school or work or to different service providers. Clothing and hygiene supplies also consistently is up there within the top 3 unmet needs that young people are identifying. And again, this has been consistent across the country in every place that we've done the survey. Employment comes up frequently. As you might suspect, this can be a higher priority or a lower priority based on the age of the youth. So when we're talking about youth 18 and over, employment very frequently is up there in the top 1 or 2 unmet needs. Young people, of course, need a job so that they can make money and pay for their food and their housing and their clothing. Medical and dental care, particularly dental care, has come up as an unmet need in most communities. Medical care as well, but certainly dental is very high up on the list. in every community that we've looked at. And safe, stable housing, interestingly, young people often do not actually identify that as one of their top unmet needs. They're identifying some of the more immediate food, clothes, transportation, and even things like employment that they see as a means to getting safe and stable housing. But the housing itself oftentimes actually doesn't really show up in the top needs. And it just reminds me of one of the meetings that we had up in Michigan, and we had a number of young people experiencing homelessness there. And one of the young men said, I could handle being homeless if I could just have a job. And really looking at, obviously wanting and needing housing, but really looking at what do I need to have and to do so that I can maintain housing for myself, and really looking at the issue that way. Some of the greatest barriers in our surveys, we asked youth, we know you're telling us what you need, and can you tell us a little bit more about why you're not able to access? So food is a great example. There may be soup kitchens, and there may be free meals, and there may be a food bank, and there may be a lot of food resources out there in the community, but the young people aren't able to access that. And so we asked them why. And you can see on the slide, for young people under 18, in every community, far and away, the greatest barrier was fear of getting involved with systems, I guess is how I would summarize that. Just wanting to fly under the radar and really not wanting to ask for too much help because of a fear of getting involved with law enforcement, with child welfare, or being returned to parents that are the people that the youth have run from in the first place. Transportation again comes up, just not able to get to resources that are out there. Parental consent, again, for young people under 18, not being able to have that parental signature to get the service. Or for all young people, even over 18, different kinds of paperwork, not having an ID, not having a birth certificate, etc. And then the last one, just lack of services. There just aren't services there. So even if we did have the paperwork and we didn't have to worry about the referral to child welfare, there's just nothing there for us to even access. So once we got the needs assessments done and kind of coordinated that, we generally convene a community forum where we really try to open it up and invite anybody who wants to come. Again, looking outside some of the typical folks who are around the table when you're talking about homelessness. Of course, you want those people there. But in addition to those people, thinking again about your law enforcement agencies, thinking about your local social work programs, and they might have social workers or students who would be willing to help out. Some of the other community agencies like Vista or AmeriCorps who might have interest and energy and time to get involved in this. Thinking about early childhood services. A lot of times when we think about unaccompanied youth, we forget about how many of those unaccompanied youth have young children. And so involving, programs like Head Start or other early childhood resources. So we try to get as many people to the table. The media certainly can be helpful to raise that awareness, policymakers, et cetera. We can present the needs assessments at that time. And then from those needs assessments, we want to try to talk about what priorities this particular group of folks could work on. We want to be guided by those needs assessments, since that is what the young people are telling us they need. But we also want to make sure that at least at the beginning, we're working on some issues that are tangible and that are short term and that are reasonable. Again, we're bringing together a group of folks from a lot of different agencies. I'm sure everyone on this call has a bunch of meetings that you're expected to go to every week or every month, and you don't have time to be sitting around at meetings where you feel like you're really not getting anything done. So we try to have some activities that we can accomplish quickly, where people can see, hey, this is actually a group that's doing something. This is a good use of my time. This is something that I can feel proud of and something that I can feel like is really making a difference for young people. So we try to shoot for tangible, short-term, reasonable, again, meaningful. The first project that the task force takes on is not going to be ending youth homelessness in the community, but it could be a step towards that. And I'm not going to take any of the wind out of the sails of the later speakers, so I'm not going to give too many specific examples because I know they're going to talk about what they have done in their communities a little bit later. Some of the outcomes, again, I don't want to go over this or belabor it, but I just wanted to put up these slides essentially to show that what we have found is that when we bring a diverse group of people around the table, we find that we have new resources that we didn't know we had. We find that we have new energy and new expertise that perhaps we didn't know we had. And we also find that we can speak with a unified voice and be a little bit more powerful, perhaps, or a little bit more persuasive than maybe we could otherwise. So, as you can see from the slide, just a little bit of quick information. So, for example, that first bullet about the independent living program in Tennessee, once the group in Tennessee started talking about the needs of young people experiencing homelessness, it came out that there were a lot of agency needs that really all fit together like pieces of a puzzle. So we found that we had young people who were, many of whom were in high school, some of whom were not, but young people who needed a place to stay. We found that we had a social work program in the community that needed more field placements for their social workers. They were having a hard time placing all of their students. We found that we had a housing authority that had empty studio units. Their one bedroom and two bedroom and higher were all full, but they had some studios that they couldn't fill. They just didn't have enough single people to fill up their studio units. So once we started talking, everybody sort of said, "Hey, wait, I have this need, I have this need, I have this need." We put all the needs together and started an independent living program for young homeless adults. And 2 years after its founding, it's won a state award and also a national award. So again, no extra funding, no extra resources, just an open conversation about what was going on in the community. And people found out that we didn't really necessarily know what was happening next door. And when we put it all together, it fit. A community in Wyoming has been able to start a host home program. They've also found that they had some community development block grant funds that were not being awarded because they weren't being claimed. So those were available. We also found that there was a high school construction class that was looking for a project. We found that there was a local construction company, an individual who had his own company who was willing to help and kind of supervise and make sure. So, and we also found that there were some folks with land who just had kind of empty pieces of land that they were willing to donate and take a tax break and provide assistance for young people. So now they're working again on putting this puzzle together, and they're hoping to break ground in the spring on what will be a community home for young people that will be modeled off of a family model, with a host family living in the house, and the young people also staying there and kind of building their own community, their own rules, etc. So I won't go into all of the details of everything on this slide, but you can see some of the different projects that task forces have worked on, small, medium, and large. All of them, I would say, made a difference for young people because they all address the specific needs that the young people in those communities were identifying. And again, you can see a few more on the second page, different ways to get the word out, different ways to raise awareness. You can check out some of those videos on our YouTube page, so you can kind of follow up on that. Another thing that our task forces have really been very powerful with has been raising the issues from the local level to the state level to the national level. So at the local level, identifying barriers or issues that were really beyond the ability of one local community to solve, but putting together a few different local communities around the state, and then a few different states around the nation, we could actually take that up to higher levels, and actually create some solutions that were beyond the local. So you can see 11 state laws related to youth homelessness, and actually it's probably higher than that, but there are 11 that I would say we can trace back pretty, in one way or another, pretty specifically to our task force work. State laws in Texas, and even at the national level, we've gotten bipartisan sponsors for the Homeless Children and Youth Act, which would expand the HUD definition of homelessness, and also some guidance from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to make it easier for youth to access SNAP benefits. Task force challenges, I won't go into too much detail here because our later speakers will talk about this, but the biggest challenge I would say is just sustainability. Again, recognizing that everyone already has too much to do, but yet when we're working on an interagency group, someone needs to be the backbone for that. Someone needs to do things like find a place to have a meeting and announce the meeting time and put the agenda together. And quite honestly, somebody needs to follow up with those folks who said they were going to do X, Y, and Z and say, hey, did you do X, Y, and Z? And can I help you to do X, Y, and Z? So there's a lot of sustainability issues that um, really, to a certain extent, can be addressed by making sure that there is an agency kind of taking the lead on this that has the capacity to be around over time and to sustain that. Different kinds of volunteers, such as Vista, AmeriCorps, interns from local universities, can be very, very helpful. But there probably needs to be someone or some agency that's going to be around year after year who can at least nurture this and keep it going. Um, and youth leadership is a source of energy and urgency that can really keep things going and keep everybody focused and kind of accountable when there are young people at the table who are saying, hey, we need you to do this. Did you do this? So, again, I'll let our other speakers get into some more detail there. I do want to point out to you the link at the bottom of this slide. If any of you have not taken a look at the Task Force Startup Kit on NAEHCY's website, I would definitely recommend it. It's got actual tools that you can use if you want to do a task force in your area, or if you're already doing one. It has sample meeting agendas, it has invitation emails, it has the needs assessment surveys, it has PowerPoint presentations. Lots of things that you can download from the website and just edit and tinker with rather than having to reinvent the wheel yourselves. So I would definitely suggest that you take a look at that. Okay, so this has been a lot of information to throw at you. I'd like to take just a quick break before we have our other speakers talk about their experiences, and let's just give you all the opportunity to contribute here with a couple of polls. So I'm going to launch the first poll now, which hopefully you are seeing on your screen. How would you rate the awareness of youth homelessness in your community generally? So, overall, just pick one of those. I realize there may be subtleties that I'm missing, but what do you think about awareness in your community of youth homelessness generally? I'll give you a couple of seconds to go ahead and cast your vote. Okay, I can see on my screen that most of you have voted. So, for those of you who haven't, I'll give you about 2 to 3 seconds to quickly cast your vote. And then I will close the poll and we can see where we stand here. Okay, closing poll. So you can see 80% overwhelmingly agree that there is awareness in the community, but only in certain circles and groups. And a lot of you actually say that there's little awareness overall about youth homelessness. And unfortunately, that's not uncommon. Only 2% say that they think there's a lot of awareness across the community. So clearly, we have a long way to go. And this is something where where the Youth Task Force actually can be very, very effective because, again, we get different agencies together, we can get the media there, we can get policymakers there, and we can increase awareness overall. Now, let me ask you one more question, if you'll bear with me here. So now taking a step away from awareness and actually talking about priorities and what people really think they need to be working on in your community. Do you feel that addressing youth homelessness is a priority in your community? Which of those four answers do you think comes closest to describing the prioritization of youth homelessness in your community? I can see that most of you have voted at this point, so I'll go ahead and give you just a couple more seconds for anyone who would still like to vote to cast your vote here, and then we'll see the results. Okay, so I'll share those results with you. 40% do say that it is a priority in the homeless provider community, which I think is great. 33% say it's not a major priority, but there is momentum. We certainly have, over the past year or so, had some additional push towards working on youth homelessness coming from the federal government, and hopefully that's something that's been translating a little bit in your local communities. Um, 14% say it is a priority across sectors, which is great, and then of course 12% not a priority. So thank you for doing that poll with us. I see that obviously there's a lot of work to be done. Incidentally, whatever your vote was and whatever end of the spectrum you feel like your community is on, again, I think there's a lot to be done with homeless youth task forces, and I think we can have a lot of success and make a big difference by bringing agencies together around this issue. So thanks again for doing that poll with us. And what I'd like to do now is turn this over to our speakers. Our first speaker from Sacramento, California is Shahara Hyatt. She is the director of the California Homeless Youth Project. She and her agency have just been tremendous partners for NAEHCY over the past 3 years or so. And Shahara, we'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your experiences in Sacramento.
Hey there, thanks Patricia, and thank you so much for the work that you've done around the country to start these task forces. I know that they have been incredibly instrumental in so many communities, and Sacramento is no exception. Our task force started just about 3 years ago as one of the early task forces. When we did, some of our most exciting achievements came directly out of those surveys that Patricia mentioned, both the surveys to young people and also the surveys to adults working with homeless youth in our community. When we did that, transportation was one of the top 3 needs that was identified by young people. And so we know that Sacramento is a really sprawling urban area. There have been a lot of budget cuts to public transportation in recent years. And we know that that's sort of long-term infrastructural challenges that would take us a while to really address. But as far as having an immediate tangible goal, we thought, what can we do today to alleviate some of the transportation needs of some of the young people that we know are experiencing homelessness and could really benefit from it? So we planned something that we called A to B Bike Giveaway. That was a title that came up from one young person, where we partnered with 2 local health fairs in different areas of Sacramento County. We got a small grant, a $2,000 grant from a local community foundation, and that was matched by Walmart in-kind contributions in terms of bicycles. And then we had a lot of other community partners donate. The homeless education liaisons donated backpacks. NAEHCY gave us some additional funding support to have lights and locks and helmets and things like that. And then a community organization came and did safety training with young people so that we know we would give them everything they needed to be successful on their bike, including the information about how to lock up properly and how to wear your helmet and things like that. And so we partnered with education liaisons who gave their students a ticket that they could come to the health fair and claim their free bike. And this was really exciting. It gave our task force a lot of reason to come together, enlist a lot of community support, raise community awareness to our local philanthropic foundations and also some of the other nonprofits working around health and LGBT issues in our community, and started to just solidify those relationships. And like Patricia mentioned, you know, nobody wants to come to a meeting that just feels like it's another opportunity for everybody to just talk or complain. We wanted to feel really action-oriented, and this gave us the opportunity to do that. We were literally building bikes together, and that created a lot of rapport among the task force in our early months. One of the other major successes is having an active youth council, and I will say that was one of the biggest challenges starting up. But now I would say that the youth council is probably not only one of the most enriching aspects of the task force work, but also probably just of my job generally. And it's been really fulfilling to talk to young people. I think that, you know, they are so hungry to have their voices heard, and not just their stories, but their ideas for change. And we hold a monthly meeting that we call Youth Council, Your Voices Matter. We provide snacks, and sometimes we have other incentives, small gift cards, things like that. But over and over, we hear from young people that they don't need those incentives, that they are nice, but they understand the urgency of homelessness, and they are, like I mentioned, just really hungry to have their voices heard. And they want to be enlisted as partners in action. They want their intelligence and their experience to be used for good, to better their situations, but also the lives of other homeless youth in our community. Some of the keys to our success is having a regular meeting schedule. For our youth council meeting, we meet monthly at the local drop-in center for homeless youth. And then for our larger homeless youth task force meeting, we meet every other month on the first Wednesday of the month, and so everyone can kind of put it in their calendar for the year. We meet at the same time, same location. We've been really fortunate to have that kind of stability and have actually our local continuum of care offer a facility space for us to do that. And then we try to make sure that we have a planned agenda that speaks to the needs of homeless youth, and that we take responsibility for different action steps. Individuals take responsibility so that it's very clear what needs to be done between one meeting and the next meeting. And we communicate through emails and phone calls and sometimes in-person meetings for some of the kind of subcommittee work that we have developed out of the task force. So we have a larger homeless youth task force, and then based on the surveys that we received back, we started a work group on transportation, one on housing, and one on LGBT homeless youth, because we identified those as really primary needs in our community. I want to, if I could, go back to the previous slide really quickly, just to touch on some of the other successes. So including homeless youth in our local efforts to end homelessness has been really tremendous. I think that we are one of those communities that a couple of years ago, before we started, we felt like there was very little awareness of youth homelessness in our community, even among the broader homeless provider community, because a lot of times the homeless youth serving agencies were not receiving HUD funding or not necessarily formally a part of the continuum of care, and a lot of that has changed as a result of the task force work. This year in January, we enlisted young people who are currently experiencing homelessness to participate in the annual point in time count in January. And so they were able to lead groups that went out to hotspots where young people tend to congregate to do the counting and also to do the surveying. And they were probably the most culturally competent in terms of volunteers we could have possibly had for that count. And it led to a much more robust count than we had had in previous years. We've also, as a result of enlisting young people as partners, been able to have much more accurate, I would say, media narratives around homelessness that transition away from just pathologizing the individual and instead look at the systems and structures that allow children and families and youth and young adults to become homeless. And so that's been really key, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the other slides. The last one that I've got there is new county funding for a 6-bed shelter for transition-aged youth, so that 18 to 24 population. As a result of having a collective voice, by bringing together homeless youth providers and advocates in our community, which had not been done ever before, we were able to advocate to our County Board of Supervisors about this critical need in our community. And it meant a lot more than just having one voice or one organization there, but to say collectively we are united in this, in expressing our need for more services and more of a continuum of services for homeless youth in our community. You can go to the next slide and the following one as well. Great. So some of the key people and agencies that keep the task force moving and keep it productive, like I mentioned, our local continuum of care offers our facility space. That's been really crucial. I know that we haven't always felt like the continuum of care has been focused on the needs of youth homelessness. And so by meeting physically in their office space, they attend our meetings, and they've really increased their awareness and expertise on youth homelessness, and also now think of the Homeless Youth Task Force as a brain trust when they want to, say, write their NOFA application about what is going on in Sacramento around youth homelessness, what is being done to address it, where are the service gaps, like Patricia mentioned some of the amazing information that came out of Tennessee, where are they having trouble filling their rapid rehousing vouchers, things like this. And how could young people be able to take advantage of some of the existing programs and services for homeless adults in our community for that transition-aged youth population. McKinney-Vento education liaisons are another really key community in our task force, and I think that's probably true of all of the task forces across the country, that at least the NAEHCY started ones. They are actively committed around ending youth homelessness, identifying their homeless youth. A lot of the bills that Patricia mentioned that have, turned into law in California have been ideas that have come from our incredibly expert education liaisons. So their contributions are invaluable. We also have other advocates that can do lobbying and advocacy work, like the California Coalition for Youth here in California. We have both frontline service workers, but also the executive directors from some of the youth-serving organizations in Sacramento, and having that level of leadership participate in our task force is really great because it means that more executive level decision making can be made, and we're having a coordinated effort with the key players in the room who need to be there. We've also had some success in bringing in the staff of local electeds, city council members, county board of supervisors, as well as state legislators and their district representatives to work on, say, transportation and housing, because they want to know, what are the unmet needs of, people who are extremely low income, and we can talk about that from a child, youth, family perspective. Next slide, please. Some of the key people and agencies that are missing from the group, I would say law enforcement, local business, and child welfare. And this is sort of tricky. One of the big topics of discussion that have come out of our task force work, and specifically out of our youth council, is the criminalization of homelessness and how it affects young people experiencing homelessness. And this is something that speaks to not only the issues of youth, but everybody experiencing homelessness in our community. And to talk a little bit about that, there are laws on the books that disproportionately impact people experiencing homelessness, like anti-camping, anti-panhandling, anti-loitering, things like that, that can be, sitting, sleeping, standing. These are activities of survival for some of our most destitute community members, right? When people are sleeping outside because they have no other choices, it's not really camping, it's survival, because there are no other services available. And so we've done a lot of work to raise awareness about that in our community, and that ticketing, citing, arresting people for engaging in these life-sustaining activities shouldn't really be viewed from a criminal lens. It should be reviewed from a systemic lens around why aren't the supports and services available that allow people to make different choices. So we've wanted to strategically involve law enforcement and local businesses so that we can do better education, training, and awareness for them, so that young people aren't being harassed, aren't being cited. Right now, it's been really contentious in our community because our local drop-in center is in sort of a rapidly gentrifying community, and there's a lot of NIMBYism going on. And that unfortunately means that pretty much any time a young person experiencing homelessness is seen, folks call the police. And instead of just talking to them or asking the young person what do they need or what's going on, or getting a better sense for why are they digging through a trash can, it's not because they necessarily want to hurt you. They are looking to recycle because that's a method of survival. So we still have a lot of conversations to happen around how we can do that really thoughtfully. One thing I'll say, actually, I just found out this week that our local child welfare agency has committed to have somebody attend all of our meetings moving forward. So I'm super excited about that. We're really looking forward to having more participation within mainstream child welfare services and not just within the homeless provider community. Next slide. So some of our biggest challenges, not exactly when we were getting started, but probably about a year and a half into the task force work, I would say sustainability came up majorly. And initially, I've been like the local coordinator, the facilitator, and I had also been facilitating all of our subcommittee work, so the different work groups on transportation, housing, LGBT, as well as the task force, as well as the youth council. And I sort of realized why am I doing all of these things? That's not really sustainable, and I have other primary duties that I need to attend to. And so I brought this up with our task force and encouraged others to take ownership and leadership of aspects that they were particularly interested in. And now we have folks that facilitate all of these different groups so that there is more of a diffusion of labor, and there's more ownership, so it's not just one person. The other challenge that we had was youth input. We got a youth council started, and then a couple months into that, our drop-in center closed for a long time. They lost significant funding. They had to secure new space, and it was really difficult to kind of bring young people to the spaces that we were meeting. And so there was sort of a lapse in youth input. And I wanted to say that the youth input is so critical, because when we want to make sure that the efforts that we're working on in Sacramento are actually grounded in the lived experiences of young people who are currently homeless. And we want to know, what housing models would they be into? Would they like a host home? What would they need to be successful if they're transitioning from living on the streets to living in somebody's home? And to get that kind of input from young people, it means that we can move forward much more responsibly and in a much more informed way. Some of the topics that we've been able to broach with our youth council meeting have been, like I mentioned, the criminalization of homelessness. We've had focus groups specifically around lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender homeless youth and their needs in our community, and then also gentrification in our community and how homeless youth are impacted. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, so some of the challenges that continue are consistently enlisting youth as partners in action. I think that we've done a really good job of having young people be a sounding board for some of the activities that we're working on, and also a space for them to talk about issues that are coming up for them in our community. But we want to do more working side by side. I've had so many young people come up to me after our youth council meetings and say, I just want to get involved in something. I just want to be a part of something meaningful and a part of something big. So one of the things that has happened recently is a lot of the transition age youth that are living on the streets have been coming to city council meetings every week and talking about the issues that impact them directly to the mayor and to city council members. And so we want to be able to just keep the momentum of this youth engagement involved. In terms of the issues that we struggle with in Sacramento, I would say, like many other communities, we need more of every type of housing. We need more emergency shelter, we need more transitional housing, we need more permanent supportive housing, and affordable housing for very low income folks. And then also, like I discussed, reversing the trend of criminalizing homelessness, which tends to just exacerbate homelessness rather than alleviate it. And with that, I think I'll pass it back to Patricia or the next speaker.
Thank you, Shahara. I appreciate that. Those were great experiences that you were able to share. And I will now pass it over to Courtney Smith. Courtney is one of NAEHCY's young leaders. She has done a tremendous amount of work with NAEHCY, not only leading 2 Michigan task forces, but also providing research support and a lot of other contributions to NAEHCY. So, Courtney, take it away.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for the introduction, and thank you, Shahara, for just being just such a champion in this work. And I just am so honored to be on this webinar with all of you. Well, I'm Courtney, and I'm just going to talk about some of the things that we have done in Michigan. Some of our most exciting initiatives in Detroit. I'm going to focus on Detroit for the purposes of this forum. Was our job skills and training pop-up workshops. We just adapted a soft skills training curriculum from Baltimore, and we took it to one of the local youth service providers, and they were interested, and they were interested in using the curriculum to kind of teach youth the skills that they need to obtain jobs, though we couldn't necessarily say we are going to, give you a job, but just being able to offer the resources for them to get the tools they needed was something that was underway. We had a lot of challenges with that, which I'm going to talk about on another slide. But another initiative that we had was the partnerships with Good 360. As Patricia and Shahara said, there is one of the top needs that you identified was clothing. And though it wasn't an immediate need through our surveys, it was something that we kind of gathered just with conversations with the youth. And so NAEHCY was able to launch a partnership with Good 360, which just basically allows service providers to be able to receive clothes, shoes, different goods or services that they could give to their participants in their programs. I think one of the most exciting projects that we were working on in Detroit was the transportation projects, just because it encompassed so much and there were so many layers. As we know that if a young person doesn't have access to transportation, then that could be a barrier to attending school, to obtaining a job, to even keeping a job. So transportation is just a key piece in escaping poverty and social mobility. And so what we were able to do, our transportation committee, coupled with students at Eastern Michigan University. At the time, I was a student at Eastern, and some of the students heard about what the work we were doing at the task force and a local student group. They invited me out to speak at one of their meetings, and so I talked about the task force and some of the projects that we had going on, and they wanted to join in on the efforts, specifically with the transportation project, to kind of fill some of the gaps we were having in participation. And so out of that, we kind of band together, and Pedal for a Purpose came out. Interestingly enough, it was also, the title came from one of the young people at one of the youth serving organizations in Detroit. And so what ended up happening was we had a bike-a-thon where some students, some community members, they biked from Ypsilanti to Detroit, which is nearly 40 miles. And we started a GoFundMe fundraiser where people could pledge or to donate money to alternative means of transportation. Ultimately, the alternative mode would be bikes. And so people donated money on the GoFundMe for the bike-a-thon, and we were able to raise, I think it was maybe $2,000 with the match that we received from NAEHCY. We had about 20 people bike 40 miles, and then by the time that the bikers got to the endpoint was Detroit at the youth serving organization that served homeless youth, one of our key partners. And so we ended up having a community awareness event at the same time that the bike-a-thon was going on. So as you can imagine how crazy things got. But it was a lot of fun. And at the community awareness event, we were able to have 5 youth speak about their experiences experiencing homelessness and educating the community about what their needs are, what some things that they would like to see in the community, which to me honestly was the most powerful point of the whole event, just being able to hear from the experts, because they were the experts of their own lives. And so that was something that happened. And then, Patricia, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, and so some more initiatives that we had was our Facebook page. Our Facebook page, the Michigan Task Force on Youth Homelessness, it gained a lot of momentum when it first started, and so we were able to share just some resources about job updates and just resources from different youth serving organizations. And we were able to provide links to different, clothing banks and housing resources for youth on our Facebook page. So that was something that was pretty good. Another thing was the Youth Council Initiative, which was something that was underway, which also presented itself kind of with a challenge. But this was in the very beginning. We wanted to focus on building relationship, and so we were able to go to the Tigers game with the help of some tickets that we were able to get. And that was really fun and exciting. Advocacy was another piece that the task force did. In addition to advocacy surrounding like just youth homelessness, they were able to advocate on behalf of some of the citizens during the Detroit water crisis. If you're familiar with what happened with the water being shut off, and water is and shouldn't be a right. It's something that we need, and so a lot of the young people were affected by the water shutoffs, and so some of the task force members was able to speak on behalf of that, and so that was exciting as well. And who are some keys to your successes? Youth voice was a very important piece, because in our meetings, though we wanted to break it up and have a youth council and just a separate task force for community members, it didn't quite work like that. And so what ended up happening was we were able to have these really cool conversations across generations, which I think was so powerful, because youth, even during the surveys, youth had totally different answers than what the adults had or what the needs were in the community. So the youth voice was so important because they were able to inform a lot of the decisions. There were so many different young people from the youth serving organizations who were at the table, and that was really exciting. Strategic relationship building, that came through working not only with the youth service providers, but also using the support that we got from one of NAEHCY's staff to reach out to homeless liaison school, the school districts and the libraries. So we were able to use some of the resources that we had to build really strong relationships. Youth advocates was especially important. There are some people who have been identified in Detroit as advocates for this work, and so they were able to join the team. The core group of task force members was super important, very important even still to this day, though I'm not still directly a part of the task force. We're able to still have this sustainable model with the task force members that were still there. The ones, though it was only a small group of people, they were able to keep the task force going. And then perseverance is another thing that is important to, a sustainable, successful task force, because things are going to go wrong. There was a lot of things that went wrong, but just kind of funneled through it. Some of the key people, the agencies that kept the task force moving, of course, was NAEHCY, Matrix Human Services, McKinney-Vento liaisons, and the community members, the shelters, the youth advocates, and now one of the things that we were able to do is transition to get more of the policymakers involved. So that's not on the slide, but that was another key piece in keeping it moving and productive. And some key people, agencies missing from the group. Business leaders were missing from the table. We were hoping to get more financial support for the bike-a-thon, but unfortunately, like you guys said in the poll, youth homelessness is an issue that is talked about only in certain groups, and so business leaders were missing from the table. Law enforcement. Shahara did a really great job of breaking down what that looks like, criminalizing youth who are experiencing homelessness. Of course, especially in Detroit, where that is very, very, very prevalent. It would have been very great to have law enforcement at the table. Also, youth serving organizations were missing, though we had the youth serving organizations that serve youth who were experiencing homelessness. It would be great to have other service providers to kind of provide the youth with additional needs that they had from a holistic way. And when we first got started, some of the challenges that we had was weather. That was a really big thing. We had to reschedule our meetings like 2 or 3 times due to the weather in Michigan. We had a lot of, it was big snowstorms, and so that kind of pushed us a couple of months behind. And so that was a little discouraging, but when we finally were able to have the meetings, they happened and they were productive. Securing the meeting locations. I think Patricia tapped on this in the very beginning. What was a challenge because we wanted to be able to have the meetings at a place that was accessible to all people, including our young people that were attending the meetings. So being able to rotate the location so that it was on a bus route, and that it was easy to access was something that was kind of a challenge. And that happened in the very beginning. I think we kind of worked through that towards the end. Community participation. That was kind of hard. I kind of talked about some of the challenges we were experiencing with the creation of the job skills workshop. We had this curriculum that was all established. The task force members worked really hard, even developed the schedule, and were willing to take off time off work to get this thing off the ground, but we kept running into roadblocks from the school that we were looking to bring the workshop into. And so with those barriers, we just kept hitting roadblocks and roadblocks. But eventually we was able to connect with a youth serving organization that was interested in the job skills training workshop. Another thing that was a challenge, like I mentioned before, kind of what's the youth council, this idea of having this separate entity from the larger task force, but just getting young people to be able to come and to share in their experiences and not to feel ashamed, but to use their voice as a tool to mobilize people and to educate. And so that was the challenge in the beginning, but one way that we were able to address that was, for me personally, self-disclosure, just sharing some of my personal experiences with the youth kind of made it okay for some of the youth in the youth serving organizations to share their voice as well. Okay, we talked about the recruiting youth as a challenge, but we were able to provide assistance with transportation. We gave incentives. We had different initiatives. Another challenge that we experienced was the attendance on the conference calls was pretty low because, like Patricia said, everybody has so many different things to do, and so it's kind of hard. These are very technical things, but it was kind of hard to get people to join the conference calls during work. And so one of the things that we were able to do was to give out more frequent reminders, but then also something that was very strategic in Detroit. It worked that people like to have in-person meetings. And so that was something that we were able to kind of solve, just having more meetings in person. Consistent meeting attendance. This was a big thing because it seemed like every time we got something going, we had a brand new set of people come into the table. So in terms of sustainability, that's hard because it's like you're always starting over. And so one of the things that we were able to reconcile that with was scheduling the meetings ahead of time and being very, very strategic about reaching out to those individual persons that were at previous meetings to get them to come back. Again, the focus being on building relationships and breaking up duties and responsibilities so that other people could feel, included in our initiatives. Sustainability, kind of talked about that just a little bit. One of the things that we did, we applied for a local grant. Unfortunately, we weren't very successful, but we were able to kind of still get the support we needed through the GoFundMe campaign for a project for our task force. Research, Shahira kind of talked about giving internal leadership, breaking up some of the tasks, because I found myself doing a lot, and of course that's not sustainable. And so being able to have other task force members willingly step up to the plate and say, okay, I'll do this, it was really great, and take leadership over some of those committees. Some of the strategies was bringing, again, key leaders that were at the table to kind of step up and take ownership. And another way that we are, the task force is still being able to sustain itself is through the social media presence and the marketing material. The Detroit task force, there was a lot of there was a lot of people who were asking some of the task force members to come and to represent, just to speak at different events. And so being able to have a brochure, something very simple, to kind of talk about some of the initiatives, kind of gain more interest, and people were able to get involved that way as well.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate that summary of all your great work in Detroit. What I'd like to do now is shift over to our last speaker, who is joining us from Miami-Dade County. Deborah Albo is the McKinney-Vento liaison for Miami-Dade County Schools, and also one of the key leaders of the Youth Homelessness Initiative there. So Deborah, go ahead and tell us about your work.
Thank you, Patricia. And I want to thank Patricia particularly because she actually came to visit our leadership last week. We are very new, only about a year and a half old in this current youth homeless initiative in Miami-Dade County. And essentially, we started with a symposium that we had about 100 different community members attend. And what we found was that there was a great deal of support, but also a lack of information about the youth homeless, unaccompanied homeless youth population. So what we did from that symposium is we started we started a whole initiative, and we started with the leadership. The leadership involved is two co-chairs, and now I myself serve as one of the co-chairs, and the other is Bobby Ibarra, who's the executive director of the Miami Coalition for the Homeless. In addition to the two of us, we also have backbone support, which Patricia has spoken about earlier, and has made a huge difference in the work that we've done, because Pauline, who is our backbone support, has been instrumental in keeping this whole initiative going. What we've done is, from the symposium, we created 7 subcommittees, and those subcommittees are the education and employment, funding, permanent connections, well-being, housing, data and research, and most recently we've added the youth committee. Initially, we had wanted youth to serve on each one of our subcommittees, but what we found, it was very difficult to have the youth come to our meetings because, again, as was mentioned, our meetings tend to happen during the day. So what we've now done is we've created a youth committee that is convenient during their time to come and be a part of the initiative. The steering committee consists of each subcommittee has 2 leaders that are involved, and we try to get leadership from the organization. So in education and employment, for example, one of the leaders is the executive director of a major education institution here in Miami. So what we've done after that is then we've continued to partner with now up to 40 community and government agencies, and we meet on a monthly basis. The subcommittees do meet, and the steering committee as well. And those are in person and both on the phone. Next slide, please. we've taken what's called the community impact model, and what we've done is it's similar to the needs assessment that was discussed earlier. We've taken an approach of system scans, and what we've done is each of our committees have gone out both within the committee and in the general community and determined the greatest barriers and needs from Miami-Dade County and youth homelessness. What we found from there is that then we went and we now have root cause analysis. And like I said, we're sort of in the beginning stages, but we are prioritizing ourselves, just as Patricia had mentioned, what per committees, what it is that we need to be doing. So education and employment has certain priorities, as does funding, as does housing, and we each within our committees are dealing with those. And now going forth, we're going to develop our action plans. Because of the youth leadership, and primarily through our high school and university and our local agencies, we're finding that the issues that they have are, of course, mirroring the issues that you all see throughout the country: the transportation needs, the food, the access to education and employment. And because of their voices, we have more of an impact when it comes to our continuum of care. Also, we have several successes already that we've experienced in Miami-Dade County. First and foremost, Florida International University, which is part of our education employment group, has applied for funding through the Florida Department of Education, and now they have extra funds for dorms for our homeless youth for summer and holidays. So we now have it so that our youth who attend FIU, which are more and more homeless youth each year, don't have to leave when it's the summer and when it's Christmas and Thanksgiving, and that is a priority, as many of you are aware, for our students who have nowhere else to go. In addition, Miami-Dade College, our local college, they had a policy related to residency. Through our initiative, what we were able to do is change the requirement, which asks for a driver's license and an address, and unfortunately most of our students didn't have that, and we've been able to use other means through the school system to verify residency, and therefore those students don't have to pay out of state tuition, which was much more expensive. Another success is our we're going to have a new drop-in center, which in Miami-Dade County we're huge, and unfortunately we did not have a drop-in center. So this is coming in the next few months, and that will be 24 hours and very needed. The next, and I think a huge success just visually throughout the county, is our eye count. And the eye count was started about 2 years ago. When we originally went to our continuum of care, we spoke about the fact that there are so many youth in Miami-Dade County who are experiencing homelessness, and unfortunately at the time, they, on their point in time count, counted 7 youth in the entire county that were experiencing youth homelessness, and we knew that wasn't true. And the school system alone at that very time, I think there were over 300, and the need was there. So we've joined forces with our continuum of care to have eye count. The logo was actually created by a youth in our area, and we've been able to blast this throughout social media, on buses and libraries, and have youth fill out an online form to anonymously count exactly how many youth we have. Because so many youth come to Miami, specifically South Beach, to hang out, and they oftentimes are running away from other places. South Beach is 24 hours. It's very difficult to see which youth are homeless and which youth are there partying. So what we've done is we've joined forces with our local continuum of care and our homeless youth outreach to be able to find hotspots in different places to find youth. Our continuum of care also, for the first time, extended the eye count to 2 weeks long. Initially, they started, it was only one night, and based on feedback we had from other communities, we've convinced them that, you know what, it would be a lot easier if we had more time to capture the number of youth in Miami-Dade County who are experiencing homelessness. And I've been shocked, absolutely shocked, that it's actually it's working. And every year now, since the first started, that 7 is a number of the past. We've had many more unaccompanied youth come out, and our support with the universities, with police departments, with the parks district, the libraries, and the bus system has helped tremendously. So that's all I have, Patricia. I wanted to keep it brief because I know you want time for questions, but I'd be happy to answer any if there were.
Thank you, Deborah. And again, thanks to Courtney and to Shahara. At this time, we are ready to take questions. We did have one question come in on the chat box, which I was able to answer in the chat box. And the question was the location of that Tennessee housing program that I mentioned, and that was in Johnson City, Tennessee, called the Homes for Youth program. At this time, we don't have any questions in the chat box. But people are welcome to go ahead and type in a question. We'll keep it open for a couple more minutes. I did want to make sure that everyone is aware here on the last slide, you've got contact information for all of the speakers. I know it frequently comes up that you might be thinking about this in a week or two and remembering something that Courtney or Shahara or Deborah said, and now you can track them down over email and get those questions answered at a later time. Just a couple of housekeeping pieces. If you go to the Materials tab on the right side of your screen, you should have your control panel, which has a Materials tab. The PowerPoint is right there. You can download that right now if you'd like. Also, a little bit later this afternoon, you'll get an email from the GoTo training site, which will have a link at the very bottom where you also can access that PowerPoint presentation through the link. And that will also have a short evaluation that we'd love for you to fill out if you can. It's just 4 questions, shouldn't take more than a minute or 2 at the most to complete that. So at this point, again, if there are no questions to tackle right now, you're welcome to follow up with any one of us later with additional questions. But otherwise, I will thank all of you for joining us today and for participating. We're really glad to have you here with us today and hope that this was helpful for you if you're looking at convening interagency groups in your area on youth homelessness. I do see that we did just get one question in the chat box, so before I sign off for good, Deborah, can you repeat the list of the Miami subcommittees that you have, the Miami-Dade County Youth Subcommittees?
Absolutely. We have the education and employment, that's one. The second is funding. The third is permanent connection. The fourth is well-being. The fifth is housing. Sixth is data and research, which also encompasses iCount. And then the seventh is the youth committee.
That's great. Thank you very much, Deborah. And thanks again to all of our speakers for your time and for your leadership and for joining us today. And with that, I will sign off and wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you. Bye.